Join world-renowned negotiation experts, Dr. Robert Bordone and Dr. Keld Jensen for this exclusive live webinar. As Dr. Bordone reveals transformative insights from his groundbreaking new book, Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. Dr. Bordone is a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, founder of the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, and founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute, and number 28 on the Global Guru's Top 30 list. Dr. Keld Jensen, ranked number 3 by Global Gurus, and the author of 27 books published in 38 countries. His concept of partnership negotiation has been placed as the world's third best negotiation training program by Global Training. He is a professor at Aalborg University in Denmark, BMI Executive Institute in Lithuania, Louvain University in Belgium, and Thunderbird School of Global Management in the US.
Hi, Bob, and good morning, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am so thrilled about today's session because I'm meeting one of my heroes. You say you should never meet your heroes, Bob, but here you are. Because I've been following your work and your videos for years now. And for everybody, I hope most people attending today know Bob, but if you don't, you should, because he is one of the thought leaders in the world of negotiation, somebody you should follow. And our message today is really important because Bob wrote or co-wrote this brand new book that I basically just say, if you are in the world of negotiation, and we all are, you have to buy and read this book because it's really a good one. It's solid work. So, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. I am thrilled you're here today.
Keld, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. Very, very nice of you. I feel equally honored to be here because you are global, and so this is a real special treat for me. So thank you so much.
And you survived the whole book writing and the publishing tour. I assume you're still doing it. And I know you've been everywhere with the book, and you've been doing probably a load of these podcasts. So I will try and spice it up a little bit so you don't repeat yourself all the time, because I know how that is, Bob. So that's great. I can only encourage everybody watching, whether you're doing it on LinkedIn Live or you're doing it on YouTube, you can ask questions, and Bea, my assistant, will pop the questions up on the screen right now. But let's get started with just asking everybody where you're from. So please write where you are watching from. It's always exciting to see people coming in from everywhere in the world. Bob, let's get started. And I've kind of, we haven't prepared anything, the two of us. I prepared a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is actually opening by provoking a little bit. And what I mean by provoking is saying, Bob, let's start by saying, what is the most dangerous myth people believe about conflicts? And how has that shaped the way we behave and all the failures we see? Because I think we have to be honest, we're not very good at handling conflicts as human beings. I'm generalizing, and that's one of the many, many reasons I feel your book is so needed. So anyway, the first question is, what is a dangerous myth people think about conflict and conflict?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Because I think one of the premises of our book is to try to debunk the myth that conflict is bad, and that conflict is to be avoided, or that if there's conflict, it means somebody has done something wrong or something is just off.
Right.
And I would just say that conflict actually is endemic to relationships, and when handled well and kind of welcomed, is an opportunity for connection. It's an opportunity for transformation and creativity. So the whole idea, I always get anxious when people are like, "We're really working hard to avoid conflict here," and I think like, okay, let's back up one step, or even worse. Excuse me. We don't have any conflict here. Oh, we're a conflict-free place. I was like, are there relationships there? Or is it like all bots or something, So for me, that is probably the biggest myth and a hard one to undo, Keld, because you're right. Most of us, and frankly, I include myself in this, much of the time, I'm not that good at it, or I could look back, I could now, if you read this book, you probably see many more stories of kind of my failure And in retrospect, to think about what I could have done differently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree. And I love your take on it as well, Bob, that you're saying that conflict is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, it's something good can come out of people disagreeing. I often think that, when we really make progress is because people have been disagreeing, but have been doing it the right way. Now, Bob, I have 2 young sons, and obviously they go to elementary school, and there's a lot of conflicts in school. We all know that. And I was wondering, just reading your book and watching my sons the other day and watching them interfering and interacting with the friends at school, why don't we teach how to handle conflicts already at elementary level? Well, why have we just missed that? We're very focused on art and language and mathematics, but the social skills is like, poof, it's not there.
Yeah, this is such a great question, because and it's a question I've gotten a number of times just going around talking about this book. People saying, oh, do you think we could do this in elementary school? Or do you think we could teach conflict resilience in middle school? And
right.
I think the answer is absolutely we can. And there's a good question. Well, why don't we? I don't, at some deep philosophical level, no. I suspect there's a number of possible reasons. I think one is, in some sense, I think we often think of conflict as disruption. And to the degree that often in school, disruption gets thought of as problematic, as keeping us from the lesson of the day,
right?
We again code it as a bad thing. And is conflict, I mean, disruption? It is disruption in a way. But again, when it's handled in a healthy way and in a constructive way, it's creativity. It's not disruption. So I think that's one reason why. I mean, frankly, I think another reason why is because so many of us are not good at it. We don't think that it's something that we can teach, right? And I think the other thing, and I'd be curious your reaction on this, because I also feel this way about negotiation in general, or many of the skills that we think, and I think not only just think, but we know are so central and important to effective leadership, but often get coded in these weird ways as soft, or as something you pick up as you go along,
right,
or as not teachable.
Right.
And none of those things are true.
Right.
It's not soft, it's essential.
Right.
It's as teachable as math.
Right.
And it's as essential as science and engineering and all the other things, right? Economics. But I think there's this weird way in which it gets coded as something you kind of pick up as you go along, or
right.
So yeah, I don't know what your reaction to that is, but those are my thoughts.
Well, I'm just grabbing something from what you said there, Bob, because you actually mentioned it, and I love that take on it, where you said that you frame conflict resilience as a skill, not a trait. So what you're claiming is that we can all learn to be good or better at dealing with conflicts. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I bring to this very much a growth mindset.
Right.
And what I mean by that is not that all of us are equally gifted in the set of skills that are required to be effective at handling conflict.
Right.
But all of us are capable of improvement and growth, whether we are the world's best diplomat,
right,
or having trouble, figuring out with our spouse whether we should have Chinese or Italian for dinner.
Right.
We can improve.
Right.
And it's worth the effort doing that.
Right. Right. What I often find, Bob, when I work with clients or students and are running a workshop, when I ask people, how many of you have met an aggressive, combative negotiator where there was a conflict or disagreement? Everybody raised their hand. And then I say, how many of you enjoyed doing that? And then nobody raised their hand. So is part of the reason we are not good at it? I'm generalizing, because obviously there must be some people who are good at it, but is the reason we're not good at it because we deep down dislike it, or we're scared of it? Is that the thing?
Well, I think there's a number of things going on. I think we do dislike it, but I think part of, your question is so great, because I think one of the challenges is we don't have a good idea, even in our mind, of what good looks like. So sometimes some people, I think good is the ability to bully or be persistent to the point of annoying.
Right.
And they don't want to be like that.
Right.
And truth of the matter is that is good insofar as sometimes it gets you what you want in the short term. But if you have a broader sense of what a good outcome is, it's usually actually not a good way to negotiate or handle conflict. And as we know, there are actually effective ways of being skillful and assertive, right? So I think one of the issues is we just don't even know what it looks like.
Right.
I do think that, there's another big issue, which is that and this is one of the fun things for me about writing this book, Keld, was I, wrote it with a brain scientist. And our brains, from a kind of evolutionary perspective, are hardwired to protect us.
Right.
And from an evolutionary perspective, those fight and flight tendencies in a given moment serve us.
Right.
Except for the fact that in most of our business, our families, our country, our civic organizations, it's not an existential issue.
Right.
And those immediate instincts can actually get us into trouble.
Right. Right. Yeah. That absolutely makes sense. Thank you for that wonderful answer. We got a question from Kevin. He's saying, what are your thoughts, Bob, on agreeing to disagree?
Yeah. I have complex thoughts on that, Kevin. I would say this. I find, excuse me, I find the phrase agree to disagree is too often thrown out as an avoidance mechanism, right? I don't want to get into this. Agree to disagree. Now, do I think that after hard conversation where we develop an understanding of each other's perspective, where maybe you go from being a thin cartoon character of somebody on the other side to me to somebody who has a more complex story, but we're still not seeing things the same? I think that it's fine to say, it sounds like we're going to probably just have to agree to disagree on this particular issue. So, Kevin, I'm not sure whether you mean it as a quick throwaway phrase, but I could tell you to the degree you mean that. There are many times when I hear that, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not satisfactory to me. And I think that's how we often use it, right? So.
Yeah, that's a great take on it, Bob. I never thought about it that way, but you're right, actually, because often when you hear it in a negotiation, people are saying, let's agree to disagree, right? But you can feel there's some emotional thing underneath where they're a little bit butthurt, right? They're a little bit offended. So, okay, let's just park it. So I think in lots of cases, you're right, Bob. It's really not dealing with the conflicts, it's kind of avoiding it. So I think that's a very good takeaway. Bob, in the book, you talk about name, explore, and commit as a framework. Which of these steps do most people skip? And what is the consequence of skipping that? Yeah,
so this is a great question. I mean, I'm going to answer this in such a lawyerly way and say it depends. But I do think that the first part, which is the name part, is the one that gets skipped most frequently.
Right.
And one of the things I am imagining, I am hoping that people will pick up our book because they have in their mind some difficult situation or person or set of people that they want some advice on. And I hope our book delivers on that. Here's where it's going to be disappointing. The first part of the book is not about the other person, right? The name part is about yourself. And so when we say name, we're really naming, helping you to name what are your own internal conflicts. The various sides of yourself that get you ultimately bollocksed up across that negotiation table, or maybe have you decide to not bring certain things up that ought to be brought up, and so just as an example, right? I think there are times when there's a side of us that feels like this isn't worth it, or it's pointless, or I'm not even sure I'm right here. And then there's a side that says, but I have something to say, and it does keeping me up at night, and it does feel unfair.
Right.
And the name piece is helping helping people to think through those sides that can be in conflict, and then helping them find a way to give all of those sides a voice in the negotiation or the conversation.
Right.
And I think this goes to back your earlier question, Keld, about conflict and about how conflict can be a source of connection as opposed to a source of disconnection.
Right.
Because when we in whatever it's a workplace or in a relationship, find those ways to give voice to all of those sides in a constructive and genuine and authentic way, we're actually more real with the other side than when we just decide it isn't worth it.
Right.
And sure, they think the relationship is preserved, but then we get to go home and, wrestle with it on the pillow at night, right? So I would say the name piece of I think is the one that we often skip over or don't give it justice, at least.
Right.
And then we're kind of in the room, but we're missing half the story.
Right. Would you claim, Bob, in general, that we grow through the conflict rather than try and get past it? So in a relationship, whether it's a negotiation, business, commercial, or private, that when we work our way through the conflict, we come out strong on the other side and just try and get by it, pass it, park it. So your recommendation is sometimes embracing that conflict, I assume, right?
Absolutely, right. So at the heart of the whole idea of conflict resilience, I mean, we don't say this is conflict resolution, right? Resilience is that capacity to enter into and sit with the discomfort, to get through it, right? And we see that as a point of both personal growth, the possibility of a different kind of outcome with the other side, but also I think one of the analogies we use, I don't know how well it works, right? But it really is kind of born of my own experience. I mean, teaching at Harvard Law School and seeing this shift in students where you would be teaching them these skills, right, that you and I teach all the time around negotiation and process. And they could do it very well in simulations. But then in their actual life, they were becoming more and more avoidant.
Right.
And so the analogy was like, you could know how to, on theory, make an incredible French meal. But if you can't stand the heat of the kitchen, you will not get any croissants at the end because you need to be in the heat to make the croissants, right? Or whatever.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. That's very good. Paul is asking a question here. Given that conflict is a natural part of relationships, if in a negotiation there's no conflict, is that a sign that something is wrong or missing?
Yeah, great question, Paul. Again, I always am apt to give the lawyers "it depends" answer. I mean, what I want to say in that, right, is one could imagine a negotiation that's pretty smooth without much conflict, right, and doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong or missing. I do think, just taking the first part of your question, Paul, that over a period of time in any relationship, if there's not some disagreement, if there's not some conflict, if there's not some different viewpoints that are going on, I do think something bizarre is happening that may even be wrong, right? Because unless the other person and you are both perfectly aligned, somehow or another, it starts to feel like someone isn't saying something in service of smoothing something over. And for me, and this is, by the way, I should just say, my priors are to be a people pleaser. My priors are to be avoidant. I think that's partially what drew me into this work. Although I think I'm far less avoidant, probably because of doing the work. I don't know if you've had that experience, Keld, but I used to be much more avoidant than I am.
Sure.
But one of the things I've learned, right, it's the power of the first no to make all of the other yeses be real.
Right.
Is just true, right? And if you can work through that, it's a stronger relationship. And so, I know it's a long answer to your question, Paul.
Right. Could we get a little bit personal here, Bob? Because just getting back to growing through conflict, do you have a personal example you want to share with us, Bob, where you personally experienced that growth? Where you embraced that conflict and it gave you a better outcome than just getting past it?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, I do. I mean, I probably have a bunch of them, but I could talk about. I hope as one of my colleagues, who's also one of my very closest friends, But to make a long, complicated story much shorter, it was somebody who started as a student of mine, then became a teaching assistant of mine, then became a friend, and now is a friend and colleague. But what I would say is that there was a period of time, particularly as our friendship was growing closer, and when he was, now we work together, but in different organizations. But there's a period of time where I was his boss at Harvard Law School. And there was a lot of confusion around where the role of boss began and where the role of friend began. I'm sure Toby actually wouldn't mind me telling this story. But I think there was a real time, he was working with us for just a year. This is actually at the time of the Great Recession. And so his law firm said, we don't want you to join us for a year, do something. And I said, you could come work here for a year. And then he went off to the law firm in New York City. And I think that presented itself as a natural break when our both professional and personal friendship could end. Right. And by the time he left, there was a lot of strain.
Right.
I think from my perspective, I often felt like I was coaching him and advising him to make him better. And I think from his perspective, he felt like I was tougher on him because we were friends than I would be on other colleagues. But I will just say that part of what made this work was sticking in there. And I think because of that, when we teach in a classroom, we have just a certain kind of ability to do a bunch of things together that I think I don't even necessarily get to do as well with some of the others. And it's just a very deep and edifying friendship now with him and his wife and his kids. And so I'm really glad I stuck in there. By the way, I would say that I could imagine sticking in there and deciding, you know what, this is just not going to work. And I think that would have been okay as well.
Right.
It would have been sad in some sense.
Right.
I think the thing I'm glad about, and I think what I might have done 10 years before that, is just said, oh, well.
Right. Right. So is that a thing? But what you're saying is that because you have been growing as an individual, as a human being, so you were more capable of dealing with that conflict?
I hope. I think the more I've done this work, the more I've seen the benefit of engagement over just throwing in the towel.
Sure.
And I think over time, right, you start to see, one of the things we talk about in our book, right, is just this importance of a self-reflective and self-awareness loop.
Right.
And you start to see where are your kind of extra sensitive triggers or downfalls.
Right.
And I think that ability to see that has helped me recover more quickly from either a situation that I kind of let blow up, or sometimes a situation where I think no, I should have said A, B, and C. And I think I'm going to go back and do that. And it's allowed me to, in ways that sometimes maybe are not appreciated. I don't know if you experience this, Keld, as a mediator, but I definitely do. Someone is saying A and the other is saying B, and they're saying, oh, I'm so glad we're aligned. And I think there's something tempting as a mediator, if you just want to get the thing done, to nod your head and say, oh yeah, we're aligned, and move on to the next issue. And I think probably I did that 15 years ago. And now what I'll be is I know, I love the fact that you're saying you're aligned. I don't think you are. People look at me like, are you the mediator? Aren't you the one that's smoothing things over? But if you're hearing something, and I'll do that in meetings too, right? People are trying to be nice, but I actually think we don't agree. And I think there's a service to that I don't think I would have been able to do 15 years ago.
So is that about, calling out the elephant in the room? It's just about voicing it? Is that what you felt could be a tool that works?
Yeah, just naming it and raising it. And it doesn't have to be done in a mean or nasty way. And I certainly don't mean it to be I think it can, if you don't do it skillfully, it can come across as you're trying to create trouble.
Yeah.
Or disrupt.
Sure.
But in some sense, right, I think it's about trying to get into the heart of where we might disagree, because that will actually, if we can work that out, that will help us. And if we pretend it isn't here,
right,
is there some chance it will melt away? There is. It's also more likely it'll simmer and grow and become a problem down the road.
Sure. I absolutely agree. Moise is asking you a question as well, Bob, here. Since our natural instinct often tells us to avoid or suppress conflict when it arises, what are some simple tactics or opening phrases we can use to address it directly rather than avoiding it altogether?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great question. I think there's lots of possible lines, right? Sometimes I might say something like, so if I'm the one who is disagreeing, I might say something like, I have to say, I see that a bit differently, and I wonder if I can explain where I'm coming from. Or, what I'm hearing is this approach. I've often thought of it in this way. So you don't have to say, I completely disagree with you, or you are wrong, right? Which I think is unhelpful. I think if you're seeing it happen in a room, one of the things we talk about is kind of taking like a balcony or third perspective, and being able to say, and there's a listening component to this. So, I feel like I've heard 3 or 4 themes here that are not quite aligned, or that are quite opposed even. You might even say that are quite opposed. I wonder if we can dig into that or explore that a little bit more. So I don't know if that's responsive to the question. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've actually picked up and learned from is that I'm traveling quite a lot, and occasionally I'm in Asia as well. And the reason I mention Asia is because if I check into what I would call a very nice hotel in Asia, the level of hospitality and understanding of hospitality in Asia, I feel is way higher and better than it is in the Western world. So let's assume I check into a very nice a 5-star hotel in Asia. What I often find is that when you have a dialogue with the staff at the reception, they are very well trained. And if you complain about something, they're not agreeing or disagreeing with you. It's not like they're saying, oh, shut up. You've checked into one of the best hotels in Bangkok. Just shut up and go back to your room. They're not arguing with you. And they're not agreeing with you either. It's not like they're saying, oh, Bob, you're absolutely right. You got the worst room in the entire hotel. Now, what they're saying quite often, and I paid attention, is they're actually saying, Bob, I understand you feel there's a problem. Let me see if I can help you solve that problem you feel that you got. And I really love that way of dealing with it, right? Because you're just showing empathy. So is that a tool that is compatible with dealing with conflicts in negotiations as well?
I would say for sure. I mean, in some sense, the way you phrase that, there's almost like an active listening piece, right? Or listening piece, right? There's kind of reflecting back what you heard.
Right.
And then there's the, how can we solve this? I mean, this almost like an invitation to joint problem solving.
Right.
Or what, which I really quite like. And it's not saying I agree that whatever, the water is too hot.
Right.
So yeah. It's a very interesting, good observation.
Talk about culture. One of the things that interests me, obviously, is cultures, and culture is many things. Obviously, I mean, both of us are in the US right now. We have many different cultures here. But I'm thinking a global culture. So I'm, leaving the US, going to Serbia, China, or wherever we want to go. How do you see the difference in dealing with conflicts in different cultures? And the reason I'm asking, Bob, is I think your book is really great, but in some cultures, it's a negative thing trying to deal with the conflict. You don't say no, you say yes, even if you mean no. So how do you see conflicts on a global scale, and how could people in other countries than the West be using your book and learn from it as well?
Yeah. I love this question so much. And I think it's challenging at a lot of levels, right? So one of the things that I would just say, it's funny, I'm actually going to Singapore on Monday, and everyone's getting a copy of this book. And in January I was in Dubai, working with Indians and Pakistanis, and they all got a copy of the book. And so a few things I would just say about culture, right? I mean, I do think that the cultural overlap of certainly some of the ideas in our book is limited in some ways. So for example, like I have often experienced, I think what you said, Keld, for sure, which is where people are, how much they're willing to engage or avoid conflict or name something as conflict. And there's a variation. Some cultures I might be experienced as extremely avoidant, and some is the opposite. So I mean, one of our book actually opens with a contrasting story of students in my class at Harvard Law School and me working with young Israeli and Palestinian leaders who are in the room together. And I would just say they are going at it, right? But there's just, I don't think anyone is there then suddenly falling into pieces in the way that if that same interaction transferred into a Harvard Law School classroom, I mean, it would be like, the front page of the Harvard Crimson the next day. Right. But I also, so I think there's a difference there. I think there's also, at least in my experience, a difference around the willingness and okayness of expressing emotions or getting at the emotional aspects or identity aspects of conflict. I think there's also differences around the amount of relational rapport building that people expect or want. And I think all of those things, right, when we negotiate across cultures, we need to develop a sensitivity to, we need to learn as much as we can about those differences. And I say all of that, and also, I think there's a way in which if we get too into the culture thing, and this is something that I sometimes have felt teaching negotiation, we can miss a lot, and it's also used as a very convenient excuse. Oh, that was just because of cultural differences.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
And the other thing I would say is, there's national cultures. There's also professional cultures.
Right.
There's also cultures of two that you build.
Right.
I mean, in the co-writing of my book, and one of the things that, Keld, you may have noticed, I mean, I think we bring up a number of times, is we talk about this idea of conflict tolerance. Like, what is the moment in which you experience us as being in conflict versus someone else might not, right? And my co-author, I like to go back and forth. It's fun for me. It's sparring. It's good. I learn. I'm trained in law. And I would do this sometimes with my co-author, and then, I'd just go on to the next meeting. And then I find out 3 days later that he was like wondering, sleepless nights, like, is this book going to get done? Is Bob upset with me? So I say this just to say that there are these professional cultures, there's organizational cultures, there's national cultures, and we want to be attentive to them.
Right.
We want to learn as much as we can. And there's some ability even within that to create your own culture and not to let it be an excuse for why you can't do something.
No, I absolutely agree. That's a great answer. Thank you, Bob. How do conflict resilience differ from emotional intelligence, or is it really the same thing?
I think it's different. I think when I think about emotional intelligence, at least as I understand it, it's that ability to be kind of emotionally intuitive to what someone might be feeling or the feel in the room, and then your own feelings. And conflict resilience, as we define it, is different. It's more about the capacity to sit in the room with the discomfort of your disagreement, meaning being both authentically assertive and also curious and a good listener.
Right.
So I think they're cousins. I think they're different. Sometimes people have asked me, what is the difference between conflict, like a conflict resilient space, and a place that has psychological safety. There's another one of these words, right? Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. I think there's probably more similarities to that, but I think of emotional intelligence as related but different. But in my mind, both really important leadership skills.
Right. Kevin, you're asking another question down here. He says, let's say you're in a conflict with your team during a negotiation. What should you do to make sure you're realigned? Which is a great question, because, conflict is not only with the counterpart, it could be with your own team, right?
Yeah, great question, Kevin. I think I have a few thoughts on that, right? First thing I would just say is you probably want to take a pause for yourself. in that meeting and do an assessment of whether it's something that you think can be appropriately addressed in the moment or not. So I think one of the things we talk about in the book is this idea of limbic irritability, or the moment when our kind of emotional side is overriding the kind of frontal lobe, the more cognitive side. So I think there's a question of timing. Whenever you decide to, I do think that there is some value in, again, just trying to name what the disagreement is that you perceive. And, you're asking the question, what do you do to get realigned? I don't know what I think about realignment. I think it's important to talk about the areas of disagreement, understand what folks' interests are that's driving that, and find some way forward, which maybe that is realignment. It might be not so much that folks are aligned in terms of agreement with whatever we're doing, but that people have felt like they've had a chance to be heard, that you've kind of worked through the differences, and that folks can get on board with whatever direction you're going in. Larry Susskind, Keld, have you ever had Larry on the show or no?
Yeah, we did.
Larry, when he talks about consensus building, he doesn't talk about people being all voting in favor of a strategy.
Right.
He talks about doing the hard work to address the concerns as best you can, where everyone can see that we're trying to do that. Right. And then in the end, saying, even if you're not completely excited about this, can you reasonably live with it in a way that you can support it?
Right.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Wonderful answer, Bob. Thank you. As you mentioned a few times, you co-wrote your book with a neuroscientist. Is there something where the brain wants us to do something in a conflict that we absolutely shouldn't do?
I think a lot of times the answer to that is absolutely yes in the moment, right? In the moment, that flee thing might not really be that helpful, or the fight. Right? We talk about 5 F's: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or fester. Like my go-to tends to be fawning. Like once I feel like we're actually in a conflict, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What can I do? I don't think in the end that helps me, because I might give away the store in that moment.
Right.
So I think that I think the answer for sure to that is yes. I think this is where, again, the power of a pause comes in. Matt Lieberman, who's at UCLA, talks about what he calls affective labeling, which is naming to yourself what the emotions are that you're feeling, because that helps you more quickly return. Your brain can return to something that is more purposeful rather than reactive.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes sense. For those of you who arrived a little bit late, I'm talking to Bob here about his brand new book that I strongly recommend. It is a necessary book in your bookshelf if you are handling negotiation at whatever level. And talking about high-stake corporate negotiation, or it could be political, Bob, where power and ego often dominate. How do you get both sides to commit to resilience instead of retaliations? Because, we have seen what's happening right now with tariff negotiation around the world, right? Yeah. And it's not talking politics here, but it's interesting for me, probably you as well as a negotiator, sitting there watching what's going on. And you see one side is introducing tariff, and then retaliation comes from the other side, and they choose to do that as well. And I'm just sitting there wondering, that reminds me of my 5-year-old in kindergarten. You threw sand in my face, I'm going to throw sand in your face as well. And that may not necessarily be the best way forward. So my question to you, Bob, is that when we have that ego, power, whatever, how do we utilizes all the wonderful tools you share in the book. And how do we make that egocentric individual on the other side of the table understand that perhaps we should do something else than just retaliation?
Yeah, gosh, this is the $64,000 question you're asking here.
I apologize.
That's okay. If I could solve this one, and maybe I could be nominated for some big prize or something,
Yes.
because I think it's a tough one. Well, it's so funny because, I mean, it's not funny. It's actually what you said is spot on. It's like 5-year-olds at an adult level, and I always begin my negotiation classes with just an iterative prisoner's dilemma game. And if you end up in a situation where both sides are defecting, and one side is essentially saying, "But I'll have more flowers on my gravestone than you," or there'll be more people at my funeral than you.
Right.
You're in a bad spot. And your question, of course, is how do you how do you turn that?
Right.
And I guess my thoughts on this are somewhat limited, but I'll share a few. Right. One would be, is there some way you can demonstrate to the set of people who are using power and ego in a way that's meaningful to them, that taking another tack will get them better outcomes for themselves? Right. We know analytically as negotiation experts that that's possible. We know that through cooperation, we could take a 10-point pie and make it worth 20 points. And that if you can get 10 of 20, it's better than getting 7 of 10. But that has to be somehow communicated in a way that's meaningful to the person who's very happy getting 7 out of 10 and saying, I won. I think that's one thing. I think sometimes that doesn't work, particularly if what the person cares more about is the winning than the points. Right? Because if you care about the points, at least you could persuade, you might be able to, if you can show, like within a particular a business ecosystem, that you can demonstrate that there's a bunch of deals that I'm able to do over there that I haven't been able to do with you because you use your power, and over there we're creating 20-point pies and all my other counterparts are getting 10. Here we have a 10-point pie, you're getting 7. But what happens if they don't care about that? They just want to win, right? I mean, you didn't ask me that question, right? But that's a tougher one.
Right.
And then I think about, but maybe it isn't a tougher one, right? Because maybe it's, how do I redefine what a win might look for that person?
Right.
How do I think about who are others that person might defer to in their ecosystem and work backwards to get them on board? I think the most challenging, the place you don't ultimately want to be, but sometimes you do find yourself in, and this is not aspirational,
right?
But it's this idea of the mutual hurting stalemate,
right?
And sometimes, unfortunately, especially if you have two, ego escalate. I talk about 3 E's: ego, emotions, and escalation.
Right.
And when you find yourself in that situation, and these people are trapped, and the only thing that gets them out is when their mutual pain threshold is so high.
Right.
But of course, the cost of that is so high.
Right.
That any way you could do an intervention, would be useful. But
right.
Keld, I want to turn the question on you, though. I'm so curious to hear your strategy on this.
I would actually quote one of my partners, Jason Mirowitz. He has the perfect quote. He says, "I would rather lose in a collaborative negotiation than winning in a positional one." And I think that's a wonderful quote, because I love everything you said right there, Bob, because I think some people are too preoccupied with just the concept of winning, and in reality they're losing. So back to the ego thing, they just get so preoccupied with the ego thing. I just want to look like a winner even though I walk away as a loser, right? So I think back to that tariff dilemma we have, and it's not an easy one to solve, right? But one thing, if I should share my 2 cents on the whole thing, one thing I don't believe is working out is just retaliation. So if you build up with 5, I build up with 7. I don't think that ever worked in any negotiation, whether it's political, commercial, or privately. It wouldn't work with my partner at home. I can promise you that. So why would it work on the international stage? So anyway, that's good. We have a wonderful question from Mr.
Can I say one more thing? I just thought of one more thing, maybe just.
Sure.
I think one of the errors that people make in negotiation, and I think we see on this tariff thing, It always drives me crazy when people talk about the other side as the opponent or the adversary.
Sure.
And the mistake somehow is that a trading partner is your opponent or adversary.
Sure.
When they're your partner,
Right.
Because if some in a war, you probably do in a war want to be chaotic and have surprise attacks when people least expect it.
Right.
But if someone's your business partner,
Sure.
chaos is not a good strategy.
Right.
It's a bad strategy. No one wants a business partner who's chaotic and so that framing piece, I don't know if you experience so often, I feel like half of the work, or at least a big part of the work of teaching negotiation, is getting people to reframe their thinking about their negotiation partner.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Sorry.
I know I 100% agree, because, it's back to trust. And this is basically what Keld Jensen is asking right now. Because if you're cheated by a business partner, what does it take to regain that trust? And that question is very related to what you just said, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess to state the obvious, right? I mean, one of the things about trust is that it's very hard to build, and it's very easy to lose, and extremely hard to rebuild. I think, what does it take? So first of all, I am somebody who thinks that all of us, even the most kind of trustworthy people, occasionally do things that are less trustworthy in a bad moment, or we misunderstand the impact. So I say that because I am somebody who believes that we all make mistakes, and therefore, like, forgiveness and second chances are important. That the idea of, like, you're dead to me is not a good negotiation strategy. And people do that. People sometimes say, like, I'll never trust that person again. I don't think that's a good negotiation strategy. I don't think it's a good strategy for handling conflict.
Right.
So okay, I'm still not answering the question. I think in answering the question, I think it's probably in baby steps. It's structuring agreements or having interactions where there are small things that someone needs to do that then kind of build some more trust over time. And, I think it's really a show me rather than a tell me. But I think you do it slowly over time with some small agreements, maybe building in some kinds of consequences if it doesn't happen.
Right.
And also, I would just say, if you're the person who has inadvertently you asked the question if you were cheated, but if you are the person who has acted in an untrustworthy way, I think apology is really powerful.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I would also say back to what you said right now, Bob. Obviously, if you've been purposely cheated by someone, that's a different story. If there was a misunderstanding that is making trust going down, right? So I guess it's also about the context. Bob, just to change topic a little bit, one of the things that has been on my radar for the last 5-6 years is the use of AI in connection with collaboration, negotiation, contracts, what have you. And I saw a very interesting study the other day where there was kind of ranking, what do people in the world use AI for the most? And what surprised me, perhaps it shouldn't, but it did, was that the number one thing was actually self-therapy. So they were basically replacing the shrink with AI. And I was a bit surprised to see that was the number one use of AI. So I was just thinking, reading a book, is AI able to help us improve the way we handle conflicts? And if that is the case, how?
Yeah. Oof. This is I am officially outside of my waters here. I mean, I think I want to answer this question by saying I suspect it can be, and as somebody who has really just started using AI in the last 6 months or so, I find it alluring, I find it helpful, and I find it limited and sometimes dangerous.
Right.
And so, okay, that's pretty vague, but here's the way in which I think it. I think there are ways it can be helpful by offering some phrases. I think it can be helpful for people who are looking for criteria Here's where I think it can be unhelpful. Is I think it. I don't think it's good enough yet, and I think it can invite people to turn what should be conversations into emails, into prepared text. I can actually share kind of a fun story with it. During the marketing of our book, I was wondering, I wonder how our publisher is doing, and should we be asking our publisher for more or less? So I asked AI, and of course, AI, gave me a list of things that I imagine a publisher does for like Brené Brown or like Mel Robbins. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't think we're getting all of that. I didn't like the phrasing, but I basically put the list into an email.
Right.
And then I got a call from the publisher. It's like, can we talk? And it was for me, it was really great because it somehow made me realize, like, you can't, like, I mean, it was a nice conversation. And, she was like, I actually learned a lot of stuff from the conversation. Right. But there was this way in which it made me more inappropriately confident about something.
Right.
That was acontextual.
Right.
So I guess if you ask me in this moment, do I think it has a lot of potential? I would say absolutely. Right. But if you said to me, Keld, in this particular moment on May 15, 2025,
right,
do I think we should use that as opposed to using it never or using it all the time? I would say use it never, because I feel like it's more dangerous.
Right.
And I'm hopeful.
Right. Sure. No, it absolutely makes sense. The way I normally phrase it, Bob, is that people often ask me how much and how and when should I use AI in negotiations. And I say, well, AI is not a replacement of your skills in negotiation. You still need to be a skilled, educated negotiator. And then you can start using it as a tool, but it's not a shortcut of what you don't know, because then it's like putting yourself into a Formula One car and don't even have a driver's license, right? You're going to crash and burn. So you need that information beforehand. So I think that's just wonderful. We only have a few minutes left, but time flies. And I have a few more things I want to cover. And let's try and go really high on a holistic level and imagine a world where what you're preaching in the book is actually being taught, as we started talking about, as early as math. And what do you think the world would look like 10 years from now if our youngsters today were actually properly trained in handling conflicts?
Oh my gosh, I love this. Well, I think that so much of the vitriol that we see in like social media spaces would dissipate. Because I think people would actually have capacity to engage their differences with each other,
right,
and not run to the cocoon of comfort that we all have. I think that we would see reduction in polarization. I think we would have the advantages of diverse work environments and diverse schools, which, by the way, I don't think we have right now. That is to say, I think many places have diversity in their workplace, or have diversity at in their school or academic institution, but we don't have the advantages of it, because people are not actually talking with each other across the line of difference. They're actually avoiding that. So I think we'd be in a profoundly better place. I mean, I appreciate that I suffer from all the self-serving biases of anybody who, spent a few years writing on a book that they were passionate about. But I think, I hope, that we would be, I wrote this book for the purpose of hoping that it would make an actual real difference, not only in individual lives, but that it could actually have some broader societal impact. And I do see conflict resilience as one of those very key skills worth teaching at young levels. Because I think I have I know that the inspiration for this book was seeing a shift over 21 years of teaching law school, where suddenly people were less willing to disagree in a constructive way in a place designed for disagreement.
Bob, do you think we're worse at handling conflicts today than, let's say, 20 years ago?
I do. I do think we are worse. And I think that is why or one of the key reasons why we see increasing polarization. Because we're less good at handling. It's not because I actually don't think it's because we disagree more strongly on the issues. And if you look at whatever, at least in the US context, things like immigration or guns or climate, the consensus around lots of things has not, like on the substantive issues, has not shifted. But the impression of it has shifted enormously.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Bob, last question of today. If our audience should walk away with just one thing, remembering one sentence, one quote, one statement, one piece of content from your book, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I would say that healthy engagement of conflict can be a source of connection and transformation. So a reframe on how they think about what conflict can do in their lives. So not being scared of conflicts. Absolutely. Yeah, not being scared of it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. I truly enjoyed it. I can only repeat what I've been saying a few times. For everybody who's been watching, please go out, if you haven't bought it already, buy this book. I think it's pretty important. What I'm always saying, Bob, is that, people journalists asking me, so why should people buy your book? And then I normally answer by saying, well, they shouldn't. And then the journalists always look very confused. And then I say, because they have to buy, hopefully, my book, but so many other books. Because, by reading one book, we're only learning that one thing. We cannot cover everything. So your book, Bob, is definitely one of the books that people who want to improve their skills in negotiation have to read. It is a required reading thing. So well done, Bob. I'm very impressed with the amazing work you have done in this book. You remain one of my heroes in the field.
Thank you. Well, same.
But where can people follow you, by the way, Bob?
They can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm there as Robert Bordone. I do have a YouTube channel, so that's just Bob Bordone. And my website is bobbordone.com. And they can read more about the book at conflictresilience.book.com.
Yeah, I actually just want to promote your videos, Bob. You put so much effort into delivering so high value content for everybody. I'm so impressed. So people, you should absolutely be watching Bob's videos as well. They're really good, professional produced and funny as well, Bob. So well done.
Thank you. I try.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Bob, for being here today. Bea, my assistant, thank you for the help, and good luck, and go buy Bob's book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is really fun.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Sometimes progress feels painfully slow, and waiting for results can be frustrating. Traditional negotiation can often feel like a standoff, leaving both sides drained. But with partnership negotiation, collaboration speeds things up. Transform slow results into a launchpad for success. Discover the power of partnership negotiation today.
That was fun.
That was great. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.